In the late afternoon light, under the lone persimmon tree in his courtyard, Old Man Ikeda sat on a wooden stool. The tree was bare now, its leaves fallen and crunched underfoot, but it stood as if guarding something important that had happened years ago. A knock at the door brought him out of his thoughts. At the threshold stood Hisako, her shoulders slumped slightly in the late day's chill. She had come to see Old Man Ikeda about the missing calf, though she knew he wouldn't have seen it. It was a formality for her. "Old man," she said when she stepped inside and saw him looking at her expectantly, "we've lost one of our calves." Ikeda nodded as if in agreement or understanding. He had long ago learned that listening could be more powerful than speaking. His silence invited her to continue. "We'll check again tomorrow morning, but I fear it's gone for good," she added, her voice softer now. Ikeda looked at the courtyard around him. The persimmon tree stood straight as a sentinel, its branches reaching out like arms holding onto a secret that Ikeda knew was just beyond his grasp. He pointed to one of the fallen leaves and asked Hisako to bring it closer. She did so without question, puzzled by the request but trusting. "Thank you," Ikeda said quietly once she had laid the leaf on the table in front of him. He picked up a pair of scissors from beside him and carefully cut the vein running down the center of the leaf into 2 sections before laying it back down. Hisako watched silently, trying to read what he was doing or why. When Ikeda finished, he handed her the scissors and gestured for her to take them. "Now you do," he said simply. She looked at him a moment longer before taking the scissors from his hand, tentatively cutting the leaf as he had shown her. Her fingers were stiff with tension, but she continued carefully until it was complete. Ikeda watched Hisako's hands move over the leaf and nodded slightly to himself. He then reached into a drawer under the table and pulled out a small wooden box filled with trinkets from years of farming and living. Inside, there was an old silver pendant shaped like 2 fish swimming towards each other, symbolizing harmony in life. He took it out and held it up for her to see before placing it gently around Hisako's neck as if he were bestowing a gift upon her. She felt the weight of the cool metal against her throat and looked down at Ikeda. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure why but grateful all the same. Ikeda smiled faintly, his eyes crinkling at the corners with age lines etched deep into them from years of smiling or frowning, or both. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, yet clear and peaceful. Hisako felt a warmth inside her, unexpected and profound. She stood there for another moment, wondering what to say next. Then she knew that words might only mar the quiet between them. She took one last look at Ikeda's face, saw his eyes still on hers, and nodded as if in agreement with something they both understood without speaking. With a bow of her head, Hisako left the courtyard quietly, walking back through the fading light towards home, leaving behind the persimmon tree and Old Man Ikeda sitting there, looking at nothing and everything all at once. She walked slowly down the path, feeling the pendant against her skin, warm from his hand. The sound of a distant rooster crowing filled the air as she disappeared into the twilight.
You're listening to the Empty Teahouse. Somewhere across the field, a single leaf rustled in the breeze that followed her. On a bamboo grove after rain, 2 figures sat beneath the rustling leaves.
On a bamboo grove after rain, 2 figures sat beneath the rustling leaves. One was an old man named Takashi, whose weathered face and hands told of years spent in quiet labor. Beside him was Hana, a young woodcutter who had lost his way while seeking shelter from the downpour. Takashi offered Hana a bowl of warm rice porridge. The steam rose softly, mingling with droplets clinging to leaf tips above. Hana ate without speaking, eyes darting around at the quiet world beyond the grove's edge. When he finished, Takashi pulled out an old fiddle and began to play a simple tune. His fingers moved slowly but surely, notes soft against the rain. Hana watched, hands clenched in his lap. After some time, he looked down at them and noticed they trembled slightly. He thought of the day's mistakes and regrets, how he had cut too deep into the forest, causing more damage than intended. His heart felt heavy with this knowledge. Takashi ceased playing. "You need something to steady your hands," he said quietly. Hana shook his head, but Takashi persisted. "I have some string left over." He rummaged through a box and found 2 small lengths of it. Handing one to Hana, he took the other himself. "What's this for?" Hana asked, bewildered. "Try tying knots," Takashi replied, demonstrating a simple loop knot. His fingers moved with practiced ease. "Each knot is like a breath out." Hana followed suit, though his hands were clumsy at first. The old man guided him through each step patiently, the rhythm of their movements settling into a steady pace. As they tied and untied again, Hana's breathing grew slower and deeper, matching Takashi's. He felt something shift inside, no sudden change but rather an easing of tension. A small weight lifted from his shoulders with every knot completed, as if each one held some part of his past burdens. Hours passed before either spoke again. "Your hands are steadier now," said Takashi, noting the improvement. Hana looked up at him and smiled weakly. He didn't speak about regrets or plans for tomorrow. Instead, he focused on tying knots, letting go a little more with each loop. When they finished, Hana stood to leave. The rain had stopped, but puddles still reflected pale sunlight. Takashi handed over some small change for the rice and tea that were now long gone from Hana's empty bowl. "Come back if you need it," Takashi called after him as Hana started down the path. Hana paused briefly, looking back at the grove and the man who had helped steady his hands and quieted his mind. Without another word, he continued walking towards home, steps lighter than they'd been in days.
The path wound around a bend, hiding the grove from sight. In the quiet alley between 2 clay walls, Hana sat on a low stool under the narrow sky.
In the quiet alley between 2 clay walls that had seen generations pass through them without speaking a word to each other, Hana sat on a low stool under the narrow sky. Her hands moved steadily over the wooden frame she was weaving into a basket. Each strand of grass was carefully placed next to another in an intricate pattern. It was early morning. The alley still smelled of last night's rain and untouched potential. Across from her, leaning against the cool wall, was Jiro, an old friend who had been away for years but whose presence felt like coming home. He watched Hana work with a quiet admiration that belied his rugged exterior. His gaze wandered to the sky where birds began their day's chatter. "Beautiful morning," he finally said, not breaking eye contact with her hands and the basket they were creating together in silence. Hana paused for a moment before answering, her fingers never stopping. "It is." She smiled, a slight upward curve at the corners of her mouth. Jiro pushed off from the wall and came to sit beside Hana. His movements were deliberate but unhurried. He picked up a discarded strand of grass and began weaving it into the pattern she was laying out. The sound of their breath mingled with the soft rustling of the grass as they worked side by side, sharing space without words. The basket took on its shape slowly, each knot an act of giving and receiving, a dance between 2 people finding common ground in a task that needed no explanation. Hours slipped away unnoticed. When Jiro finished adding his last strand, he stepped back to admire their creation. "It's perfect," he said quietly, more to himself than to Hana. She stopped her work and looked at him. The sun was higher now, casting shadows shorter in the alley's embrace. Her eyes held a depth that only comes with years spent living quietly among things that endure. "Thank you," she replied, not for the basket, but for something deeper that had been exchanged during their silent labor. Jiro nodded, turning to leave as he always did when the moment felt right. Just before he turned the corner into the wider world beyond, Hannah called out softly without looking at him. "Come back soon." He paused, then continued walking, leaving her alone in the alley with its quiet dignity and the nearly complete basket that now bore their shared patience. As she resumed her work, a breeze whispered through the narrow space, stirring the grass around them into one last dance before settling into stillness once more.
The shadow of a passing cloud drifted across the unfinished edge of the basket. Under the pale light of the moon, Liang sat by the well in the temple courtyard.
Under the pale light of the moon, Liang sat by the well in the temple courtyard. His hands were steady as he dipped the bucket into the cool water. The sound of the rope sliding through the pulley was rhythmic and calm. A gentle breeze carried with it the scent of distant pine. Across the courtyard, a figure approached. It was May, the village girl who had come looking for Liang every day this week. She stood in front of him, her eyes downcast. "Liang," she began hesitantly, "I heard your music last night." "Ah, May," he said softly, setting the bucket down beside him. His voice was warm, but there were lines around his mouth that spoke of sadness and restraint. "You played so beautifully," she continued, her fingers twisting in front of her. She had lost something yesterday, her grandmother's comb, and the loss still stung with an ache she couldn't articulate. But being near Liang always felt like a balm. Liang nodded, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "It's been hard to keep playing." She tilted her head, confused. "Why?" He gestured towards his old violin case lying on the ground beside him. The top was slightly open, revealing that one of its strings had broken during a performance last week. It wasn't easy for Liang, who relied on music to make sense of his world. "May I see it?" May asked gently, her curiosity piqued in wanting to understand more about the man she admired so much. Liang nodded and handed over the case with care. As she opened it and saw the broken string, her heart felt a twist inside. She looked back at him, seeing something in his eyes that mirrored her own pain. In the quiet of the night, they were two souls acknowledging their losses, small though they might be. Without speaking further, May reached into one of her satchels and pulled out a roll of fine thread she had been saving for mending clothes. She unwrapped it, holding it out to Liang with a tender smile. "Can I help you fix it?" she asked quietly. Liang's lips curved up slightly at the corners. He took the offered thread and touched her hand lightly in thanks. His eyes told her all she needed to know, that sometimes a simple offering was enough to mend more than just strings. They worked together silently under the moonlight, the glow casting shadows on their faces as they fixed the violin. When it was done, Liang played a short tune, his fingers moving deftly over the now taut string. It was softer this time, but no less beautiful for its quietude. As he packed up his instrument, May watched him with new eyes. In the courtyard stillness, the act of fixing something broken had turned into an unspoken conversation between them. She knew then that her own sense of loss had been slightly eased by the shared effort to mend and continue on. Liang nodded towards her as she packed up her things for home. A light breeze swept across their faces again, carrying whispers from a past full of stories yet untold. They didn't need words. They left with understanding that sometimes, it's in the small acts and quiet moments where healing begins. The moon hung high now, almost overhead. May turned to leave as Liang adjusted his violin case. Before she walked out of sight, he called after her softly, "Come back tomorrow?" She smiled over her shoulder at him and continued walking down the path that led back to the village, leaving behind only the sound of leaves rustling in the night breeze.
The lantern flame swayed once, then steadied again. Under a thinning blanket of fog, the fishing dock on the coast seemed to hold its breath.
Under a thinning blanket of fog, the fishing dock on the coast seemed to hold its breath. The mist clung stubbornly to the boats as if it were reluctant to let them go out into the day's uncertain sea. Amidst this sleepy scene stood Li Wei, leaning against the railings with his eyes closed and hands clasped loosely in front of him. His fingers felt the salt residue left by yesterday's tide, reminding him of the ocean's constant rhythm. From behind, a shadow fell over his silhouette. Opening one eye, he saw Old Shin, a fisherman whose weathered face spoke volumes about the life spent at sea. Li Wei had come to know Old Shin through years of sporadic meetings where they exchanged silence more than words. "Thought you might be here," Old Shin said softly, placing a small basket beside Li Wei's feet. Inside was a single red apple, its skin unblemished and glossy in the pale morning light. No one else came near them. The dock was empty except for two men who shared no need for conversation but still found comfort in each other's presence. Li Wei nodded, not looking up from his contemplation of the distant horizon where water met sky in a line too fine to distinguish between the two elements. The apple lay untouched between them as if it were an offering rather than food. Old Chen's eyes moved from the sea to Li Wei and back again before settling on the quiet expanse of misty air separating them. He seemed content with his company and whatever might, or might not, be said. His presence was like a calm that extended out into the water, silencing even the gulls who called overhead. A breeze swept in carrying with it whispers of the sea's vastness but also its quietude, a reminder of what lay beyond the visible world. It seemed to move through both men without touching them directly, rather, it flowed around and between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared stillness amidst movement. Eventually, Old Shin reached for his apple, taking small bites while keeping watch on the horizon. His chewing was slow, methodical, each bite as deliberate as if he were contemplating something profound but unspeakable. Li Wei mirrored this quiet ritual, turning to face the sea and reaching down to lift the fruit towards himself. As they stood side by side, eating their apples in a way that seemed more about being than doing, time lost its urgency. They simply were present on that fog-laden dock, watching the world turn around them but unaffected by its rush or turmoil. The apple cores eventually found themselves discarded at their feet, seeds scattering into nothingness along with any thoughts too light to hold. When Li Wei finally turned to leave, it was not with a word but with a nod back toward Old Shin and a look that said more than words ever could. He walked off down the dock, disappearing around its end where mist swallowed him whole. But as he moved away, a sound rose up from behind, the slow creak of old wood groaning under the weight of time itself, signaling the continued presence on the dock. Old Shin lingered there for some moments more, feeling the emptiness left by Li Wei's absence yet finding no space for loneliness. Instead, an odd sense of fulfillment settled over him as if simply being together had been enough to mark their encounter deeply in both hearts and minds. His hand moved unconsciously towards his own pocket where he carried a small object, a keepsake given years ago that still held meaning even now when so much else seemed lost. The sound of the creaking dock faded into silence once more as Old Shin turned back toward shore, leaving behind an image of two men standing on a dock under morning mist, silent and complete in their shared moment.
Amidst this sleepy scene stood Li Wei, leaning against the railings with his eyes closed and hands clasped loosely in front of him. The dock's shadow lengthened as the sun climbed, casting long lines across the planks where their feet had rested. "We close the door now. Until tomorrow."